Okay.
Hi, welcome back to the Soil Health Connection with Liz and Sarah. We're here today with Rachel Long. Rachel, can you just introduce yourself to the audience?
Hi, I'm a farm advisor with UC Cooperative Extension in Yolo County, and my area of expertise is integrated pest management and agronomy.
Awesome. Welcome, Rachel. Thanks so much for joining us today. You have done so much research on pest management and on the interaction between soil health and pest management. Can you talk a little bit about some of the in-field management practices like cover cropping and others, and how they affect pest dynamics in the landscape and on farms in our area?
Right, so I've really had a really long-term interest in looking at how to manage pests and diseases in a way that kind of relies on Mother Nature and natural resources to help us. So not just looking at counting insects and pests and then spraying and treating them to get rid of them, but looking at a much more dynamic process with integrating lots of different methods of increasing like beneficial insects and increasing soil health, so that we can better manage the pests, because of course the pesticides that we're using are having more and more problems with resistance, and the chemicals just not working so well. So when we talk about looking sort of for alternative ways of managing pests, particularly for insects, really a key area is soil health. And if we have healthy soils, then we have healthy plants, and plants that are growing really well and that are really hardy, have good root systems, and good nutrition and fertility, that these just can really better withstand pests and also diseases, that as soon as you get soil problems like compaction, low fertility, that you get stressed plants. And an insect knows a stressed plant, and they'll just come and hit that plant really hard. And because you don't have the sap flowing in the plant, and if you don't have the sap really flowing, sort of pushing the insects out and away, then it can be really susceptible to insect pests. So soil health is a key. You have healthy soils, you have healthy plants, and there's lots of ways that we can improve that soil health. And one certainly includes cover crops, and making sure to get good tilth and fertility and good drainage into for the soil, or also compost and organic matter, and bringing in more organic matter to make the soils more healthy. Crop rotation is critically important for helping to rotate the crops that you're planting for field crops, to ensure that you don't get a buildup of pests and diseases in the soil. But over the years, a lot of the pest problems that I've seen are related to soil, and in particular soil compaction, where people work the soil too wet. And when that happens, then the plants don't grow well, and then they're a lot more stressed and have more problems with pests and diseases.
And what specifically, I know you've done observations about the cover crops in orchards and how that might affect adjacent row crops. Can you talk a little bit about those specific dynamics that you've observed?
Right. So some of one of the key issues is that is selecting like the right plants for your farm. And if you grow a number of different crops, like many of us do, like orchard crops and also field crops, that you have to be careful in the cover crop plants and seed mix that you choose to put in your field, whether it's your orchard or your field crop. And in particular, that for example in orchards, that if you select a certain mix that contains like a lot of mustard plants and bell beans, that those actually are of concern for, say, an adjacent tomato crop, maybe right outside the field, because the mustard plants are a key host for stink bugs. And stink bugs are just one of the most difficult pests to control in tomatoes and a couple of other crops like beans. But there's no good way to control stink bugs once you have an infestation in your tomato crop except for to spray. So sometimes when I see the like people plant mustard into orchards, and because it has a deep taproot, and it helps to kind of open up soils, and then also you have pollinators like bees that really like the flowers. But really be careful, because that is a key host for stink bugs, and the stink bugs, they overwinter under leaf litter, behind tree bark, and the first generation comes out and builds up on mustard, radish, and melva. And so when that dries down, then they move into the adjacent crops like tomatoes, where they cause a lot of problems. So be really careful about what you choose to put in your orchard cover crop mix, because you can actually be increasing a pest problem. And same with the bell beans, the fava beans. Fava beans are, geez, great beneficial insect plant. Boy, you get a lot of natural enemies that comes to that plant, because they've got what are called little nectaries, or insectary, that they produce a little nectar, and it brings in lots of beneficial insects like syrphid flies and ladybugs and parasitoid wasps that are incredibly beneficial for helping out with pest control. But bell beans also is the key host for tomato spotted wilt virus. That is a serious problem in tomatoes. It's a disease vectored by thrips. And so if you have bell beans and mustard planted in your orchard, and you have tomatoes nearby, then you could be causing some issues. And what always amazes me is how far these insects are moving. And in terms of really, I have the cover crop, and then I'm outside, my orchard where I planted that cover crop is my field crop. And are they really moving back and forth? And the answer is yes, they're definitely moving quite a bit. And these insects can travel, up to a mile, some of them, when they're, and probably longer. You look at ladybugs, and they're migrating hundreds of miles from the hills down into the valleys. So most of the cover crop mixes are fantastic, and with different flowers that attract in beneficial insects and in bees. Just pay attention to a couple that are known to be a problem, and one of them is certainly bell beans, and the other is mustard. And if you're growing tomatoes, processing tomatoes, or fresh market tomatoes nearby, then definitely avoid those seed mixes.
Thanks so much. And what about practices that would be implemented kind of adjacent to the field? I'm very familiar with your amazing work on hedgerows. How do hedgerows impact pest management and kind of the soil in an area?
That's such a good question, and I've been working on hedgerows for most of my career, so about 30 years now, and really looking at the benefits of hedgerows of flowering plants around farms for bringing in natural enemies, for helping to control pests like ladybugs, parasitoid wasps that go after many crop pests. And also our pollinators, like the native bees. We have a lot of bumblebees and other types of bees that naturally occur in this area. And what we found is actually hedgerows of flowering plants, like you could have toyon, which is Christmas berry that has lovely red berries right now, or California buckwheat, coffee berry, and some of the fuchsia, the California fuchsia plants that are just lovely. That all of these are plants that produce a lot of nectar and pollen. And many of our beneficial insects need nectar and pollen to survive and reproduce. They just have to have it, like honeybees, nectar and pollen. That's what they need. So a lot of our beneficial insects are the same. So what we found with our hedgerows is that if you have a hedgerow of these native flowering plants that are around fields, that they do bring in beneficial insects, and they do bring in native bees and bumblebees and honeybees. And these are, all these insects move into the adjacent crops. So what I want to say is they export them into the adjacent crops. In other words, they don't just stay in those hedgerows, but they actually export them into the adjacent crops. And so if you have a hedgerow, you actually have a little bit better pest control and also a little bit better crop pollination than if you don't have a hedgerow. And that better pest control leads to fewer pesticide sprays, And the better, higher bee counts leads to a little bit better pollination in seed sets. So, so these hedgerows are paying for themselves. We know that they're providing economic benefits and can pay for themselves in terms of pest control and pollination benefits within anywhere between like 7 and 15 years. It takes a while, but it's there and it's measurable. And I think one of my favorite things about the hedgerows too is that not only are you bringing in like, birds that lots of songbirds that also feed on crop pests, but it's good for the soil. And as much biodiversity as you see above ground with your natural enemies, bees, beneficial birds, below ground, you're seeing so many benefits as well in terms of carbon sequestration and lots of microorganisms. And I just love seeing all the critters underground with the hedgerows occur with, I don't know, salamanders and centipedes and all sorts of nifty, creepy crawlies that are there that are fun to look at.
How great. So when we were talking about cover crops, you mentioned a couple specific varieties and how they impacted pests. With hedgerows, is a hedgerow, or are there certain native plants that are more conducive to building this kind of IPM beneficial insect population?
Well, so of course, a hedgerow can also include lots of wildflowers like poppies and sunflowers that attract in a lot of beneficial insects and bees. But one thing is that you have to pay attention to is like sunflowers. We grow a lot of sunflower for seed production, and so you wouldn't want to put sunflowers into your hedgerow if you're growing a sunflower seed crop, because that's got to be certified, and you can't have any cross pollination there. But for the most part, the plants that are native California plants, that they just don't host any pests and diseases that are of concern for agriculture. That a lot of our insect pests are introduced, like lygus bugs, many of our stink bugs, that those are introduced pests, and they came in to this area on introduced weeds. And so most of the association with pests is related to weeds, like the stink bugs with mustard radish malva, introduced weeds. And they're not going for things like oak trees or California lilac or toyon. So the native plants really have very few pests and diseases. And the benefits of native too is that they're drought tolerant, and so they can. You need water for at least the first 3 years to establish the hedgerow, but they can really tolerate a lot of dry conditions. And we have some of the hedgerows that I've worked on that if we put in non-native plants, they just don't survive as well. And going back to some of our hedgerows that we planted 20 years ago, that with the native plants, they're still thriving. And so it's really neat to see.
That is neat. I've noticed actually near the Davis Ranch last time I was heading over there that there's a few new hedgerows going up. So I'm excited to see how those grow as well. So the last question I have for you is, are there other opportunities that you see for building soil health and having effective IPM, and kind of what's not yet known about this topic that you would like to see delved into by researchers?
Oh, I'd really love to see more work on healthy soils and practices that can be implemented to really improve our soil health. I think right now, just looking around farms, that I see a lot of cracks in the soil from it being so dry. And gosh, if you drop a tool down there, you're going to spend all day trying to look for it because those cracks are deep. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for more work on soils to figure out how to really make sure that they're as healthy as possible, so that the plants can be healthy as well, because healthy plants are always much better able to resist pests and diseases.
Rachel, thank you so much for joining us. It's always just amazing to hear about your research, especially in hedgerows. I love hearing the data backing up, proving that hedgerows are beneficial. I did a lot of maintenance in them, and out there working, I'm just like, this just feels right. But then whenever I hear you speak to it, I'm like, yeah, there's just data backing this up. Is there
There,
anything else that you would like to add before we close our interview with you?
just that hedgerows are really important. Soil health is incredibly important, and there's so much that we can do to improve soil health and biodiversity on farms. And the more that we try to kind of encourage more natural enemies and bees and improved soil health, the more that we can just rely on what's naturally out there to help us produce our crops, excuse me, and not rely on external inputs as much, because there's a lot to be gained by the wealth of the natural resources that we just have on our farms.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much, and hopefully we'll be running into you soon.
Right, sounds good. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about my favorite subjects, which is, natural enemies and hedgerows and soil health. So I appreciate this time.
Thank you.